Hello, this is James Alexander with HostBridge Technology. I'm the Director of Technical Services, and I'd like to welcome you today to our Postman demo, showing you how you can replace the service test tool with Postman.
I wanted to talk to you guys about Postman. And the agenda today is, first thing I want to tell you, why should you start using Postman? And we've got some good reasons, and I think when you see what we can do with Postman, you're going to be very happy with the kinds of stuff we can do. And after we answer that question, we have to ask, there's different versions of Postman. There's a Postman that runs inside the Chrome browser. It's called a Chrome app, but there's also a Windows app and a Macintosh app, or an iMac app, I should say, and also a Linux app. And any of those could be used, but I'm going to talk about which ones you should use and what they're good for. There's also paid versus free. There's a free version that I'm going to be using mostly, but I want to talk about the paid version because there might be some reasons to do some of that as well. I'm going to show you how to set up a service, call a service, how to do authentication, how to pass your data in, get it back out. All of that's pretty straightforward in Postman, and if you used Postman before, you probably already know how to do those things. But one of the things that we can do with Service Test Tool, the web application, is that we can fetch that debug output and view that debug output as with our calls. And I'm going to show you how to do that with Postman as well. And other things that Postman can do that we can't do with the Service Test Tool is you can actually create unit tests inside Postman. And you can do testing across multiple regions without having to reset those tests up. And I'm going to show you how to do that. And I'm also going to show you how you can save your tests and share them with other people inside your organization. And you don't have to have the paid version to do that. And I'm going to talk about all those things today. And guys, I know you've got a keyword there somewhere you might be sharing, but if you have questions, don't be afraid to type a question in the Q&A section, and I will try to answer right then. And since it's just us, I don't think it's going to be much of a problem at all. So why should I switch to Postman? You're all familiar with the Service Test Tool, and it has worked really well for a long time. We've had the tool out there for almost 8 or 9 years now, and it's gone through a couple of revisions over the years. And it allows us to do a lot of things. Let me open one up, and we'll just kind of walk through some things. So here's my test tool. Let me make it a tad bigger. We can specify our service. We say where we're going to fetch the service from. We can turn debug on and off. We can specify the HTTP method we want, the content type. We can also post data in. It allows us to select data if we've got it saved up on the host. Let me try that again. Select data if it's saved up on the host, so I can post data in. But there's a lot of things here that it can't do. I can't specify other content types. JSON and other content types I might want to be able to test with, maybe even JSON-P, etc. Many people are doing RESTful services now, and so this is not enough HTTP methods, and there are a lot of HTTP methods that aren't supported here. My XML on the input window is not got a nice friendly highlighted editor, so you can edit and change it and know if it's correct. And after you run the request, I'm going to take off the data here and run my request. After you run my request, you get the response back in the response tab, which is very convenient. It's right there. Also in the response tab, you can view headers. You can view that the output is XML or if it's HTML or text. But again, this doesn't support JSON or JSON-P, so it doesn't give you that kinds of interfaces you need to the data so you can see the data and know that it's correct. One of the nicest things that Service Test Tool does, though, is it fetches that debug data. And this debug data is really important when you're trying to figure out what's going on with your service. And we want to duplicate all of these things in Postman so that you can do each and every one of these things. This right here, this debug data, is fetched out of stream. Now, what do I mean by out of stream? Well, when I send my request up, the request is sent up to the host, and the response comes back, and the response comes back in this tab here. But there's a header that comes back with the response. this header right here comes back with the HTTP response. That header tells me that if there is some debug data associated with this, it's located in this TSQ on my host, that TSQ right there. And so the service test tool here will do a second request to the host and ask the host to send back that debug data, and that debug data is then populated over here. So there's actually two requests that go to the host. There's one request to actually run your service and get your response back, your XML response back, but then there is a second request that goes up to the host to retrieve this debug data out of a TSQ. So these are the things that we want to duplicate in Postman, and we're going to talk about how we can do that. But again, this just doesn't do everything we want it to do. We got to support all the HTTP methods. We got to support various content types. That needs to be in your control. And you might also want to send some specialized headers with your request to signify different things to your applications. So there might be other things that you want to send that we just can't do from this tool. And of course, all the formatting, not formatting JSON-P, not formatting JSON, not formatting the XML in the input window, all of these things are problems. And I actually began rewriting service test to do these things. And then I realized that Postman, the free tool of Postman, does all of these things. So there's no advantage in HostBridge doing this testing. There just isn't, especially when Postman can do all of these things plus a whole lot more. So if you're going to use Postman, you've got to choose between the different apps. And there is a Chrome app and there's a Windows app. And I mentioned there's also a Mac app as well as a Linux app. Now I'm going to do all my stuff on Windows, so I'm going to be concerned about the Windows app. So do you use the Chrome app that is part of the browser, or do you use the Windows app? Well, Google kind of made that choice for us. Back in 2016, in August of 2016, they announced that Chrome apps are going to go away. So while I learned how to use Postman by using a Chrome app, and it worked very well for a very long time, that is actually going to go away, and it's only going to become just a Windows app and nothing else. Windows, Mac, Linux. And so sometime later this year, you'll no longer be able to install apps out of the Chrome store. And then sometime next year, any apps that you already have installed in your Chrome browser will fail to work. Now, an app is different from an extension. So Chrome still supports extensions, but they're not going to support apps anymore. And because of the things that Postman does, it has to be an app. So it's going to go away. So we don't have much of a choice. We're going to have to use the Windows app. So everything that I'm going to be showing you today is going to be with the Windows app. And there are some features in the Windows app that do not exist in the Chrome app. So if you only have the Chrome app installed on your machine right now, it can't do all the things I'm going to show you. So if you're going to use Postman, they have the free tier, which they just call Postman. And then they also have 3 paid tiers. They have Postman Pro, Postman Enterprise, and Postman for Publishers. Well, the Postman for Publishers really doesn't apply to us here, so we're only going to talk about Postman Pro and Postman Enterprise. Enterprise is a level above Pro, and the only thing it supplies that Pro does not is it supplies single sign-on for your organization. So if you've got 20 or 30 developers, and you want them all to have single sign-on using their credentials from the business, from the bank, their login on the network at the bank, then Postman Enterprise might be a choice for you. They also have a higher level of support. So if you have questions or you have problems with Postman, the Enterprise version gives you a higher level of support and quicker callback with issues. Postman Pro supplies all the things I'm going to talk about here, but Postman without the Pro. Postman supplies all the things I'm going to talk about in just a moment, but those things are at a level that only allow you to do a few interactions, 1,000 or so interactions before it shuts down, and you can only do that, 1,000 or so interactions once per month with what I'm talking about. The Pro version still has a limit on the number of requests you can send, but it's in the hundreds of thousands or millions. Having said that, I'm not sure there's any features you need in Pro. Well, let's talk about what's there. Postman Pro has collaboration, team collaboration, which is actually very nice. It allows you to create your tests, create your requests going to the host, and actually save those tests out to the cloud. And then somebody else that you give permission to can use those tests and in their environment. And any change made in those tests, other people can have those changes immediately, and they can run those changes themselves. So it's a nice way to share tests among a bunch of different people. It also lets you do documentation where it will document your API, say how to call it. You can put in different comments in addition to the documentation, so you can describe your API and share that API description with other individuals. It also allows you to build mock servers. And a mock server allows you to emulate what your API, what your web service is going to do. Now, why would you want to do that? Very often, you have people who are developing web applications at the same time that you're developing your services on the host. Well, in their development process, they want to be able to call your service. Well, your service is not built yet. You're still building it. A mock server allows you to build something that they can call that will return data in the format that your real service, when you finish writing it, will return the data in. So once you define what your API is, what the interface is going to be between the client, the web server out there, and the host, then you can build a mock server very quickly. It only takes a few minutes. And then they can start making calls to that mock server, and they can go ahead and write their web applications while you continue to write the web services. Now, the mock service will always return the same data, and it won't be accessing live data, but it does allow them to start building their applications while you go ahead and build the services. And it also provides the Postman Pro API, and the Postman Pro API allows you to programmatically interact with Postman so that you can actually make Postman do things automatically in the background, run certain tests on a schedule or on a timer, run them in certain orders. And you can do that programmatically by using a command line type interface. But here's the problem with most of the features I've just talked about. Team collaboration, the documentation API, the mock servers. Oh, and there's one other feature I mentioned, and that's monitoring. Monitoring allows you to set up a service in the cloud that calls your APIs every 5 minutes or 10 minutes, whatever interval you specify, and it calls those APIs and it checks the results. And if your API, your HostBridge web service, is not functioning or is down or is not returning the data that's expected, then the monitoring service sends you an alert. It can send you an email message or a text message to tell you that your services are not behaving appropriately. So it monitors your services to make sure they're running okay. Okay, but here's the problem with most of these things. The problem with team collaboration, the documentation API, the mock servers, and the monitoring. All of that information, all of that data gets stored in the cloud. That means that your tests, which include all the interfaces, all the test data, your passwords, your credentials, all of those things are stored in the cloud off your premises. Most of my customers do not want that information, that data, outside of their control on somebody else's system in the cloud. And I have no reason to think that it's not secure. I'm sure that the Postman people do a very good job of securing their data. But most customers are not going to allow their data to go out there in the cloud. Now, most of these things, the team collaboration, I'm going to show you how to work around, and you can do other ways. The documentation, you probably could still use the free version to be able to do that, but I'm not sure that it provides that much functionality. The mock servers and monitoring, that's going to require putting stuff in the cloud, and you're just not going to be able to do it. However, you could still get the Postman Pro API, and you can write a lot of those things yourself and running it inside your own environment. And you wouldn't be able to use their mock servers, you wouldn't be able to use their monitoring, but you could write, at least for the monitoring, you could write that yourselves using the Postman Pro API. Okay, so I'm going to recommend for most of my customers, the free version of Postman is what you want. and you don't have to pay for the other version. There is a cost, of course, associated with those things. The free version, which was I'm going to be using on the demo, costs you nothing. Postman Pro costs $8 per month per user, and Postman Enterprise costs $21 per month per user, but you have to, as a minimum of 15 users on that. And so with the Postman Pro, there's no minimum. One user can license as much as 2 or 3. Now, I'm in-house when I do my own unit testing. I will probably be using Postman Pro because I don't have any sensitive data that matters if it goes off premises. I don't have any customer data or anything like that in my environment. So if that should escape and go off outside my premise, that's okay. But again, I think for most of my customers, you're going to want to use the free version. The download and install for Postman app is, the Windows app is very simple. The only thing I've tried to use is just Postman for Windows. I have not tried the Mac version or the Linux version, but my understanding is they're exactly the same, and everything that I'm showing you should work for those other environments as well. And I'm not going to go through an install process. It's very easy to install. I know that many of you will not be able to install this on your workstations without getting some sort of support from your central desktop management team, but this is an application that I think you're going to find is well worth it. Okay, so now let's go over to the demonstration. Now, just for a moment, I want to go back over here and look at Service Test Tool again and look at the things that we can do again. We can specify the content type, the methods, the service, as well as where the repository is. We get results back here. We get debug data back here. So these are the kinds of things that we want to make sure that we can do inside of Postman. So let's go over to, let's open up Postman. Okay, so here's Postman. And let's talk about just the different pieces that are here. Over in this window right here, when we create and save our tests, you'll be able to see them over here. I can import tests, and I'm going to do that as part of the demo in a few minutes. Import tests using this, so I can import them that I've saved someplace else. I'm able to specify which HTTP method I want to use, and you can see there's quite a few methods here. I'm only going to be using get and post today. Here I can specify my request, and I'll show you how I do that in just a moment. I also can view the headers that I want to send with my request. I can run a script before my test runs. Now, all the scripts inside of Postman is JavaScript. That means if you know how to write the services, you already know how to write these scripts as well. It's just JavaScript. So you have a script that you run before the test, and then there's also scripts that you can run after the test. So before script and after script. The response is going to come down here in the bottom window, and I think that's all I need to explain at the moment. Let's start by setting up and running that same template service that I just did inside of Service Test Tool. So I just pasted this right in here, and for the moment I'm going to turn debugging off. If I can spell, there we go. And you can see here I'm specifying my host, my port, the script repository, and the script name. Now, I can add any number of parameters out here through a URL query string like this, just like I would someplace else. Or I can click my params button right here, and all of my parameters that I'm putting on the URL query string are shown here. So if I needed to add another option, like this, you'll notice that it added right to my query string out here on the end. Now, I don't need these two extra parameters, so I'm going to delete them off. We're just going to leave debug here. Now I'm ready to send this request up to the host. Now, this request is going to fail. It's going to fail because I have not sent, I'm not going to send my user ID and password with it the first time. So I'm going to do a send here, and the response comes back, and I know this is really small on your screen, but that right there says basic authentication error. In other words, I did not supply my password and user ID. I can do that by clicking this authorization section right here. So I'm going to click this, and right now it says no auth. I'm going to change that to say basic auth. And now I can supply my user ID and password. Now, when this gets created, a header gets added under the headers over here, which is the basic authentication header. That's how credentials are sent to the host. Now, it hasn't added the header yet because I have not clicked the Update Request button here. So I'm going to say Update Request, and you notice the headers went to 1. If I click on the headers, I can now see that I've got a basic authentication header that's been added. Now, I can add other headers if I needed to send other headers to my host. If I needed to send a content type or I needed to send a special header to my host, I could do that by just typing the header name here and the value here. You can also add descriptions on these parameters. Now, the descriptions are not sent with the request, but if you save these tests and share them with other individuals, they'll understand what these parameters do. Like that. Okay, so now I've got an authorization header, I've got my request set up, and I'm just going to go ahead and send it. And it immediately came back, and there's my XML. Now you can see it detected that this was XML inside my response back. And I can hit this down arrow, and I can see the other types that it supports here. It supports JSON, XML, HTML, text, and auto. Now, I know it also supports JavaScript. I can actually return JavaScript in this, and it knows what that is as well. So it understands the data types that are coming back as part of the response. Now, as part of my service test request, let me go back over here to service test for a second because I want to copy out my data that I'm going to send in. Copy this. Now, I can change my request up here from a GET to a POST. And when I change this to a POST, this body will become highlighted. Right now, I can't click on this. So I'm going to change this to a POST. Now, the body is able to be clicked on. And I can check what type of data that I want to send to the host. I'm going to check raw right here. Now, it's selected text, but I'm not going to do text. I'm going to do XML, and it's going to send the content type application XML to my host. So I click that, and I paste in my XML, and it highlights appropriately. Now, this is something that Service Test Tool didn't do. It would not allow me to send in XML. It let me to send XML, but it wouldn't highlight it properly so I would know if it was formatted correctly. So now it knows. So now I can hit the send again here. And this time I bought shares in all four of my companies. I bought 1 share each. I ran 34 transactions on my host, and here's the response that came back. Now I can see all the headers that were sent in by clicking headers. I can now see there's a content type for the application XML and the authorization header. I can also see the headers that came back from the request. So these are the headers that are coming back from my request. Now remember, this header right here is how I can find out where my queue on the host, my TSQ on the host, where that debug information is at. So if I want to retrieve that debug information, I need to use this to get that debug information off my host. Now, I can do that by sending a request after this request runs. So I'm going to go over here to this is the post request script. This is before the test runs. This is after the test runs. Now I've written some JavaScript that allows me to fetch that request. I'm going to copy that from my notebook over here, and I'm going to paste it in. And you can see that this is JavaScript. It highlights correctly and allows me to fetch that data from that debug queue. Now you can see right here that I'm actually reading the header that was sent back in the request right here. This header right here. It's going to read this header. It's going to find out where this queue is at, and it's going to pull back that information. So now I can actually rerun this script, and it's going to pull back the information. But I have to have that data go to someplace where I can see it. So I'm going to go up here to View, and then I go down to Show Dev Tools. So I went to View, Show Dev Tools. I opened that up, and it opened over here in another window. I'm going to drag it over. Make it a little bigger. And I'm going to erase the messages that were there. And I'm going to make Postman just a tad smaller so I can have both windows here. All right. So now when I run this, it's going to run my script. It's going to send back my information. Let's make it a little longer here. It's going to send back my information back here in the body. And then after it runs in the post-test script, I'm going to fetch the debug data, and it's going to write it out in this window over here. So let's go back to our body here so I can see what I'm sending in. I do a send request. It sends it up to the host. It sends back my information. And, oh, I got no debug data. Now, these are the messages that come back from the host if there's no debug data, because I haven't turned it on yet up here, right? So let's go up here and turn it on. Now I've got debug turned on. I'll send it again. And here is all of my debug data. Now there's 34 screens in here from my debug data. It shows just like it normally would. It shows every variable that was set on the screen, every PF key that was pressed. All that information is here because that's just part of my debug data stream. So now with Postman, I can send my request up to the host, and I can get back my response, and I can get all the debug information out of stream. That's really cool. What's not so cool is that I have to paste this big thing into my tool every time I want to do this. And I don't want to have to do that. There's got to be a better way. And of course, there is a better way. I want to take this script and I want to get it from my host and insert it into Postman. Postman right now doesn't let you include external JavaScript libraries. Now, that's a feature they say they're working on, and it will probably happen in the future. But for right now, they don't give you the ability to include your own JavaScript libraries for doing your tests or, like we're doing, fetching debug data. But there is another way that we can do this. I'm going to start another request up here, and I'm going to paste in this request. Now, I'm going to give you this URL later, and you'll be able to pull this down as well. Now, when I run this, I'm going to go ahead and send in run it. It pulls back a script. Now, this is a Postman script that allows me to do different things inside of Postman. And pulling back this script, I now need to include this as part of my tests. And actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that entire script and I'm going to stuff it into a Postman variable. Now, Postman has the ability to have variables, and the variables can be global or environmental variables. And I'm going to take this entire script, I'm going to stuff it into a variable. I'm going to show you where the variables are stored at. Right now, you can see there are no variables. I don't have any global variables. I don't have any environment variables. So I'm going to go over here to the test, my test here, and I'm going to paste in this statement. And again, I'm going to give you this statement too a little later, so you don't have to worry about copying it down right now. What this script does is it calls a Postman method, and it retrieves the entire text of what came back when I called this service, and it stuffs it into a Postman environment variable or a global variable called this. So the entire body, all of this JavaScript, is going to be stuffed into this variable. So I'm going to run this again, and then I go up here and look at my variables. And sure enough, I've got a new variable up here with this name, and it contains the entire script that's down below here. Now, why would I want to do that? Well, because I can now use that environment variable to actually create the utilities defined by this script down here below. So I can go back over to this, and I'm going to delete this entire thing here. Delete all of that. And I'm going to simply take that environment variable and I'm going to instantiate it. So it's going out and grabbing the environment variable, and then it's doing an eval on that environment variable, and it's signing the results into util. So all of the functions, all the methods that are inside of this script I can now utilize in my tests over here. So if I want to come over here and if I want to say util.write line hello world like this, I'm going to go over here to my console and I'm going to clear it, and I'm going to turn off debug like that. I can now send this, and look what it wrote out right here, hello world. That's one of the utilities that's inside of this script. So any of the utilities inside this script I can now use. And some of the utilities are here, some ones you'll recognize. 2hex dump is one. And I also have, if I go down here to the bottom, I've got my write line, which I created. I also have a write object. I have something called check headers and get token. And I'll show you a little bit more about that a little later. And I'm going to add more functions to this, more methods, as I need more utilities for testing inside of Postman. And you can pull down from this URL this piece of code anytime you want. And so as I add new things to it, you can use those as well. And I anticipate that you will have your own set of functions that you're going to create to test your services. And I'm going to show you how to do a little bit of that in just a moment. So what I've effectively done right here is I have allowed us to encapsulate all of the functionality of being able to get my debug data and everything else into one script that I can pull from the outside world. Now, I can save these scripts. In fact, I'm going to do this one right here now. I'm going to save this one, and I'm going to give it the name Load Utilities. And I have to create a new collection because I don't have a collection yet, and I'm going to call this Demo. I'm going to say Save the Demo. Now, you'll notice over here that I have now a collection, and it says there's one script in that collection, and I can click on it, and that first thing it says Load Utilities. It also tells me the method I'm using here to do this, which is a get. I can now come over here to my previous, this is my template test is returning my XML. I can save this, and I'm going to say simple test of template. Like this, and I'm going to store it in demo as well. And these collections, you can run all of the tests inside of a collection. So if I decide to run these tests right here, it's going to load the utilities first, and after it loads the utilities, then it's going to run the test. And I can have any number of tests following this, and it will use the utilities that are loaded in that first step. So I don't have to worry about loading my utilities each time. Now, the one thing I do have to do every time I create a new test is I have to copy this line into the new test. This one line has to be in each new test of a service I create if I want it to fetch debug output. If I just want to run the test and I don't care about fetch and debug, then I don't need this. But there's going to be other utilities in there as well that you might find useful. Okay. So I've created a couple of scripts here. One fetches my utilities, one tests my template. But my test of my template is not very complex. Let me get rid of this hello world. My test is simply to visually look at this. I just look at this and say, yeah, that XML looks right. Well, if I want to do valid tests, I really need to examine the XML, and I need to do it in an automated way. And that's one of the things that Postman does really well, something that I could never do with the service test tool. I can come over here and, oh, that's not what I wanted. I want the examples over here, the snippets. Look over here to these snippets, and I'm going to scroll down, and let's see if I can find it here. Convert. I'm looking for the one that changes my XML to a JSON object. There it is. Response body, convert XML body to a JSON object. I'm going to click that, and it pasted that in there. And so it's going to take the response body. Now, response body is this right here. It's going to take this XML, and it's going to convert it into JSON, and then it's going to assign that into this object here. Now, if I want to run tests on these things, I want to run tests on this, and the easiest way to do that is if it's JSON. Postman doesn't have E for X like I showed you in the class. Postman doesn't have that, so we're going to convert the XML into JSON, and then we're going to test the JSON. And I can do that really easily. I can say I want to do a new test, and you just do that by saying tests. And I'm going to call this by command. Now, my by command is this right here. What I'm going to check is I'm going to make sure that the first request and this attribute by command, that this says by. That's going to tell me whether that part of the XML is constructed appropriately. So the way I can do that is I simply assign across the equal sign and I say JSON object. That's this one right here, JSON object. Trader, request, array sub 0. And I'm going to show you how I got this in just a moment. $send dot command equal by, like that. Now that created a test. Now, how did I know that the structure of this was called trader and then request again, or requests with an S, and then request again with a 0 and then a $sign? Where did that come from? And then I do command. Well, let's look at the structure of this JSON object. And I can do that by using one of the utilities that's in my library. I can say write object. Oh, I got to say util first. Util.write object. And then I just put in the object name. And I want to give it this name, and I want to give it the same name here. I want to say my JSON object, like this. Now I'm going to go ahead and run this, and let's see what we get when we write this out. Okay, it ran. Let's go look at the Postman console over here and see what it wrote out. Here is my JSON object that I just wrote out here. And this gives us the structure of this entire object. Now remember, this object was created by converting the response body into a JSON object. So I can look at this and I can see that the structure is trader. That matches the XML here. Then requests, which is here. And then request. And then it creates an array. And this is array sub 0. So this is going to be the very first entry, array sub 0. And it uses a $sign here to say that this is an attribute. So all of the attributes are preceded by a $sign. So when it converts this, it converts attributes under an object with a $sign. So you can see $sign and then command, which is this, right? Oh, I got to pull that back up. Command, and then that equals by. So I can see the flow all the way down in my objects, and I can see any of my objects down here. So if I wanted to test, the company name or any of these other things, it's all here in the data, and I can walk right down to it. So that's how I knew how to use this right here. Now, when I ran this just a second ago, a new test popped up in this window right here. And if I click on this, it says, by command passed. So this test was successful. Now I've got several other tests here. I want to paste them in. Okay, so here I've created 4 different tests. I'm checking the by command, the company number, number of shares held, or number of shares being purchased. That's actually not right. Shares being purchased. Shares being purchased, and you guys still see that I have to indent things just the right way. I know I can't help myself. There's number of shares being purchased, and then here, request completed. Now, this says request completed, not okay. This test is going to fail because that's not what comes back in my XML. What comes back in my XML is request completed, okay. But I said request completed, not okay, so we can see what an error looks like. So now I can run this. And it comes back and it says test 3 of 4. That means 3 tests passed and 1 did not. So I click on it and I can see right here, buy, company number, shares purchased, request not completed. That one failed. And if I come over here and I take the not out, completed, okay. Send it again. Now I get test 4 of 4 passed. So I can take my tests here and I can create hundreds of tests here. I could test every single component of this XML to make sure that it was coming back with a response that was valid, that the structure of my XML was correct, that the values were correct. All of those things I can test inside of my test here. And it's so easy to create these tests. Look how easy it is to create this test. 1 line, 1 test. Now, what happens, though, if I want to do this test and I want these tests to run on a different region? Up here, I've hard-coded in a port number and a host name. You know, what if I want to run this on a different host or a different CICS region? Maybe I want to run this in development now, and then later I want to run it in QA or against production. Well, we can change these things to be variables. And I can do that. The first thing I need to do is go over here to my environment, and I'm going to create a new environment. I clicked right up here, that little, let me go back and do that again so you guys can see it. I clicked the little wheel up here, and I picked Manage Environments. And then I clicked Add. And now I can create an environment with variables in it. I'm going to call this my demo region. And I'm going to have a variable called host, and I'm going to call that. And I'm going to have a variable called port, and that's 7301. And I could have any number of variables here. I could have variables for the password and user ID that I'm using in the authentication. I can have variables for the repository where the script is being stored. All of those things can be variables, and I can use those variables in other places. So this is my demo region. I can add that. I'm going to add another one. This is my development region. And the host there is actually the same. But my port number is different. It's 7030, I should say. And I'm going to add that. So now I've got my development region and my demo region. I'm going to close this. And now I'm going to go up here and change this to variables. So I'm going to go up here and delete my host here. Now I'm going to call this host. Oh, it's curly bracket, 2 curly brackets, host, curly bracket, and then here I'm going to do the port, curly bracket, port, curly bracket. So now these will be substituted in. Now I need to change my environment up here to say my demo region. I can still run this just like I was before, and it runs successfully. Now this ran against my demo region. I can run it against my development region just by changing it right here and say run it again. And it fails because this is not in the other environment. It doesn't exist. It only exists in my demo region. So I better go back. To my demo region and run it again. So now I can run my services in different environments. But what if I want to share this with somebody else in my organization? What if I want other people to be able to run these same tests? You can do an export on this by clicking the 3 little dots right here, and you can say export. And when I export this, I can pick what version I want to export it as. And then I say, where do I want to export this to? Well, I'm going to export this to right there. Now that's been saved on a file system. And I can import that, or anybody else that has access to that file system can import that. Now you could put this in a source control system. You could put this on a server. You could retrieve this from other locations, and it would allow you then to pull that in and reuse it. Now, I've got a bunch of other tests out there. I'm going to go out there and import them. So I'm going to pick all of these. I'm going to say open, and you can see it pulled in a bunch of tests. Now, I'm doing all of this without being signed in to their cloud environment. So none of this information is being shared outside my own local system. But when I imported those things in, it included, my load utilities. It included the headers that had my passwords in them, so I know what my passwords and user IDs came in with what I imported. And you can have some very complex tests that you're doing. And let's just run a series of tests here. Let's run this one down here first. Now there are 9 different services that I'm going to call as part of this test. I can run them all at one time. You notice the first thing I'm doing is loading my utilities. I'm loading that utility library first thing. But I can run all of these tests at one time by clicking the little twisty right here, and then by clicking Run. Then it wants me to pick my environment, and I want to pick Greta CICSD demo region. And I can run that, and that just ran all of those requests, and it did 55 different tests all at one time. All of those tests passed. So I just ran all of these. Now I can share that with anybody else in my organization, and they can rerun those. And you can run it again just easily as clicking the little mouse button. Very, very easy to do. And if I want to run it with my other region, I simply go up here and I change this to be, my development region, and I can run it again. Now I think this is going to fail because I don't necessarily have everything over there, and it did. Connection refused. So my tests aren't going to run because I don't have those things in that environment. So I'm able to run my tests. I can run them against different environments, and I can run hundreds of tests. Let me go up and run this one right here. And again, you'll notice the first thing I'm doing is loading my utilities, stuffing them up there in that environment. And I'm going to pick my little runner here, and I'm going to, sorry, wrong thing, run here. I'm going to pick the correct environment. I want it to go to my demo region here. I can run this. It just ran 190. It ran 18 requests, but it did 194 different tests. So I'm testing all sorts of things inside of this. You can see in this one right here that I'm testing all sorts of different things inside of my XML. If I want to look at those tests, I think that's here. Let's take a look at those tests look like. So here are the tests that I'm running against that XML document that comes back when I execute this. Let me change this to demo region. And I have to run these things in order because these have to run in order because they're running against base HostBridge. And so I actually have to run them one at a time. So I can run this one, and then I can run the next one, then I can run this one. This is the one that has all the tests. It has 31 different tests inside of this. Okay, guys, so you can take and write your services, you can write your tests, and then you can use Postman to run against all of the services you've written. And you can actually automate this to run in the background so that you can run this in a continuous integration environment. So you can take your scripts, all your tests, and you can put them in a location, and you can have them run those tests every 10 minutes if you want. And if any of the tests fail, you can have it notify you that those tests failed. And all of that can stay on-premise. None of that has to be done remotely. Let me look through my notes over here and make sure that I've covered most everything that I wanted to cover. I think I have. So let me go back to my slides one last time. So Postman allows us to do everything that Service Test does and a whole lot more. It allows you to write unit tests. It allows you to save those unit tests. It allows you to share those unit tests with other individuals. It also allows you to abstract away from specific port numbers or hosts so that you can run your test against different environments, different regions. So as you promote your script from development to your QA and testing, you can run your tests against that environment as well. Postman allows you to run these tests automatically if you set it up correctly in the background, so they can run continuously against your services that you write. Run them once a day, run them 10 times a day. It's up to you to decide if you want to do something like that. So you can do continuous integration testing. Of course, Postman also lets you do those mock servers, but mock servers have to run in the cloud. Something else that Postman can do is your test data can actually come from an external data source. That means you can actually have lots of data, maybe coming out of a database or maybe coming out of files that you store someplace else, not actually in Postman, but in files on your local file system. And you can run dozens of tests using the same service you've written. So you write one service test, and every time it iterates through, it chooses different test data to run against your service. Something I didn't show back over here. Let me go back over here and show you this one thing right here. On this one right here, when I wrote this is actually a loop, because it starts up here at Trader, and it says that I'm going to do Company 1 here on Trader, and then it goes through the process of doing Company 1 as it walks through it. And then down here, where after it hits this PF3 key twice, it checks to see if it's went through all 4 companies yet or not, and if it hasn't, it actually goes back up to select company again. So it loops through these things right here 4 times. And on the 4th time, it then says, okay, I've tested, and all my tests is now go to InTrader, which is this last one here. So with Postman, you can actually programmatically run through your tests any number of times. That also means that you could run the same test 100 times with different sets of external data. Each time through the loop, you could get the next set of external data until you went through all your external data and did all those tests. So you can do tests with different sets of data until you've tested everything you care about. So it's not a matter of just about running one test, but running lots of tests with different sets of data. So Postman allows you to do a lot of things. External data, the API documentation I mentioned, the API monitoring I mentioned, the team library is nice, but again, most of these things require you pushing your data out to the cloud. API monitoring, team library, and mock servers do. And so that might not be something you want everybody to do. You might not want to have that data out in the cloud. Okay, so where can you get the utilities that I showed you earlier? That's available at demo.hostbridge.com, HBUtils, and case matters here. You guys remember the case always matters, right? That's a capital hb.pm.util.js. Now, I'm going to post these slides on our wiki tomorrow. They're not going to be available today, but tomorrow they'll be posted on our website, on our wiki site. The command I use to take that service that I wrote and turn it into an environment variable is this one right here. And this statement right here is the statement I use to take the environment variable and instantiate my utilities. These are the only things required to be able to pull down those utilities and use those utilities. Now, I'm going to export my tests too. The stuff that I showed you as the demo, I'm going to export those and also put them on the wiki so that you can simply import those things so that it will import the load utilities service, and it will also import an example of how you can run those tests, okay? One example. Everything will be available on our wiki website, wiki.hostbridge.com, including a recording of this demo. That will also be out there. All you have to do is just go to the wiki and search for Postman, and that should be there tomorrow. Well, you know, you guys can always send me an email, or you can send a ticket, send a message to support@hostbridge.com, and then open a ticket, and somebody will get back with you. If you've got any questions, if you need any information about this or anything else, of course, I'd be more than happy to help you guys.